Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION@CuandReview.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 7th of August 2024. From the news section. Scottish Defence Force protest to be met with counter-demo. This article was written by Jodie Harrison and it's being read by me, Corey. Fears have been raised that the violent disorder which has erupted in parts of England could spread to Scotland. Anti-racism campaigners urged their members to gather in Paisley on Friday evening. Reports a mob was preparing to gather at a building in the town. I apologise for the fact that sentence does not make sense, but that is how it is written. Posting on social media site TikTok, an account named the Scottish Defence Group, which had around 2,300 followers but has now been deleted, told the people in the town to attend a, quote, peaceful protest about hundreds of illegal fighting-age men being housed in our communities that are a danger to our children, end quote. The post drew alarm from activists Stand Up to Racism, who have vowed to hold counter-protests. The Scottish Defence Group account also called for similar events in Aberdeen, East Kilbride, Glasgow and Greenock for this weekend, it is reported. The post has been viewed more than 50,000 times, the Daily Record said. In response, Stand Up to Racism, SUTR, has organised a counter-protest to show solidarity with those they feel are being targeted by the Scottish Defence Group. A Renfrewshire activist from SUTR said, "The level of violence against refugees and Muslims across England over the last week is highly concerning. Racist groups have attempted to stir up trouble in Renfrewshire before, targeting a hotel in Erskine that housed refugees, and saw weekly demonstrations by those calling for refugees inside the hotel to be removed and counter-protesters turning up in response. We have already seen attempts by fascist groups to attack refugees in Erskine, and we don't want that replicated in Paisley." The activist added, "I think people should be worried that the scenes in England may happen here. We are not immune to the far-right influence." SUTR members will be present from 5:30 p.m. at the Watermill Hotel, with the activist adding, "We will have a positive and peaceful counter-protest to stop racists attacking those in the hotel." In Paisley, where far-right plan to target hotel on Friday, oppose them and defend refugees. SUTR has also planned a series of anti-racism daily rallies in Glasgow, Dundee and Edinburgh on Saturday. Unrest began following the murders of 3 young girls in Southport, Merseyside. Inaccurate social media posts blamed a Muslim asylum seeker for the killings. More than 400 people have been arrested after disorder around England and Northern Ireland, according to police sources, with the number expected to rise in coming days. Paisley and Renfrewshire South MP Joanna Baxter says she has spoken with police and reached out to faith leaders and vulnerable groups. She added that violent thuggery designed to divide communities had no place on the streets or online. "I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we have seen over the course of recent days in other parts of the country," she said. We all have a responsibility to make sure we are doing everything we can to reduce tensions, build a politics that is inclusive, and to pull our country together to ensure hate will not win. UK Government Scottish Secretary Ian Murray said, "The hate-fuelled violence and thuggery is unacceptable and intolerable," as he claimed fears of any such unrest happening in Scotland. He said he was reassured that Police Scotland do not have any specific intelligence that disorder is likely in Scotland at this point. Police and law and order is a devolved matter and under the jurisdiction of the Scottish Government. Police Scotland would not confirm if any special measures will be employed in Paisley on Friday. Assistant Chief Constable Gary Ritchie said, "We understand the violent disorder in other parts of the United Kingdom is causing concern, and we are providing reassurance to communities across the country through enhanced patrols and direct engagement." That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Jodie Harrison, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 7th of August 2024. From the news section. George Square protests today dismissed as inaccurate. This article was written by Josh Carmichael and is being read by me, Corey. Police in Glasgow have said there is nothing to suggest planned protests in the city centre today amid fears of violent disorder spreading to Scotland. The Herald has received reports this morning that far-right protesters were set to gather in George Square before marching towards a hotel on Paisley Road West. It comes amid a spat of violent protests and attacks emerging across the UK in recent days, following the knife attack in Southport that claimed the lives of 3 young girls attending a Taylor Swift holiday event. Plans for a pro-UK demonstration at George Square on September 7th were backed on social media by far-right agitator Tommy Robinson, whose birth name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, with a post stating, "The British are rising." The post online received significant backlash from politicians and residents in Glasgow, with many saying Mr. Robertson was not welcome in the city. Police Scotland last week said it would be closely monitoring the situation in England amid fears the violence could spread to Scotland. Rumours have circulated this morning that members of the far right would be gathering in George Square and marking, I assume that's meant to be marching, to the former Swallows Hotel on Paisley Road West near Ibrox. A source also told the Herald that they had been told to stay away from the city centre due to unrest. However, authorities have now suggested that the news of protests today is the result of misinformation spreading online. A spokesperson for Police Scotland said, "We are aware of speculation circulating about a protest in George Square, Glasgow today. There is no intelligence to suggest any protest is planned. Please be wary of what you read on social media and avoid speculation and sharing information which may be inaccurate." In England, anti-protests have been organised by the activist group Stand Up Against Racism. An activist local to Glasgow working with the group has suggested the rumours of today's protest in George Square and suggested the event has been falsely promoted by the far right in an attempt to spread confusion. A local activist from Stand Up to Racism said, "We've heard rumblings of various things. One of the elements this group is trying to do is put a lot of confusion in the air. We haven't had anything credible as such that something concrete is happening. That doesn't mean it won't happen. What the far right are hoping to do is push people out on the street and it not to be planned. They're throwing a lot of stuff out to see what sticks. That doesn't mean there is anything planned, but we'll be keeping an eye on what happens in Glasgow, and the police are aware of it as well. I don't foresee there being a major issue today. I think they'll try go for Saturday, again I apologise, that is how the sentence is written, when they have more numbers. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Josh Carmichael, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 7th of August 2024. From the news section. RNLI dispatched twice overnight to assist struggling yacht. This article was written by Josh Carmichael, and it's being read by me, Corey. RNLI lifeboats were called out last night after reports of a yacht dragging anchor towards rocks during the bad weather. Volunteer crews at Kyle RNLI were dispatched twice in the early hours of Wednesday the 7th of August. The pagers first sounded at 1:18 a.m. after the UK Coast Guard received a DSC emergency message from a yacht in the Plockton area whose anchor was dragging, which had resulted in the propeller getting filled and losing propulsion. The yacht was heading towards rocks in the Plockton and Loch Kishorn areas. Kyle lifeboat Spirit of Fred Olsen made best speed through windy conditions and rough seas, arriving on scene at 1:40 a.m, by which time the yacht had found a sheltered place to anchor overnight. The lone sailor on board the yacht did not require any assistance at that point, so the lifeboat returned to Kyle and was made ready for service by 2:50 a.m. The pagers then sounded again at 4:26 a.m. after conditions deteriorated further, resulting in the same yacht being dragged towards the rocks despite having two anchors out and being in a more sheltered location. Once the yacht was safely moored in Plockton Bay, both lifeboats departed the scene, with Kyle Lifeboat arriving back on station at 6:30 a.m, where the boat was washed down, refuelled and made ready for service. Jonathan McKinnon, helm of the Kyle RNLI lifeboat, said, "The sailor on board the yacht was extremely experienced and did a good job to single-handedly sail the vessel through some pretty bad weather and find some shelter in Loch Kishorn. Unfortunately, the worsening weather resulted in him ending up in a tricky situation, but our volunteer crew performed brilliantly in some pretty horrendous conditions, and have now gone for a well-earned nap before they have to head out to their day jobs." That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Josh Carmichael, and it was read by me, Corey.
This is from the Herald Scotland, on Thursday the 8th of August, from the news section. Sturgeon and salmon to lift lid on rift in BBC series. This article is written by Kathleen Nutt. Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond are to give inside accounts into the bitter breakdown of their close political friendship in a new BBC documentary. The two-part series will be broadcast in the lead-up to the 10th anniversary of the independence referendum, which was held in September 2014. Salmond and Sturgeon, a troubled union, will feature extensive new interviews with both former First Ministers, who will give behind-the-scenes accounts of key moments during a period of unprecedented electoral success for the SNP, the broadcaster said. A wide range of prominent figures share their insights into the party's journey from the isolation of the pre-devolution years to an era when it returned MPs in significant numbers to Westminster and gained control of the Scottish Parliament. Mr. Salmond and Ms. Sturgeon also speak frankly about the controversies and disagreements which ultimately ended one of the most formidable partnerships in Scottish politics. The series includes contributions from First Minister John Swinney, former First Minister Humza Yousaf, Liz Lloyd, Nicola Sturgeon's former Chief of Staff, George Osborne, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Jeff Aberdeen, Alex Salmond's former Chief of Staff. The series will chronicle key events in the political careers of both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, and chart the story of the SNP as it emerged from the fringes of Scottish politics to become the third biggest party in the United Kingdom. Archive-rich, the series will focus on turning points in the SNP's fortunes, how it built successful electoral strategies, and the tensions which arose in the hierarchy. Produced by Firecrest Films for BBC Scotland, the series will air on BBC Scotland Channel and on BBC iPlayer. It is produced and directed by Barry Ronan. The Rise and Fall of Boris Johnson, Italia 90, 4 Weeks That Changed the World, Jeremy Kyle, Death on Daytime. David Harron, commissioning editor at BBC Scotland, said, "We are delighted to be bringing our audience this landmark series, exploring the inside story of a remarkable political partnership. The series features testimony from those who are closely involved, as well as candid interviews with Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon themselves, and offers both insights into the political intrigue of the era, as well as reflections on loyalty and friendship, which we hope the audience will find compelling." Firecrest Films' head of documentaries, Mick McAvoy, said, "The Salmond and Sturgeon era is one of the most astonishing and dramatic periods in Britain's modern history. This series reveals the inside story of a period which saw two political powerhouses and a close group of friends and advisers take a fringe party into the mainstream and come within grasp of achieving their dream of an independent Scotland. This is an emotional tale of ambition, power, and broken friendships, and it reveals the human cost of devoting your entire life to a political cause." Audiences will have another chance to see Yes, No, Inside the Indie Ref, the acclaimed 3-part documentary telling the story of the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. Transmission details of both series will be released in due course. That article was written by Kathleen Nutt. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 8th of August, from the news section. Woman donates £20,000 to hospitals in memory of husband and dad. This article is written by Mark McDougall. A woman who suffered the loss of her husband and her father within 6 months of each other has generously donated £20,000 to the NH services that cared for them. Dawn Barilli has spoken about how the trauma of losing husband Joe Cook suddenly at the age of 42 in May 2023 will stay with her forever. He died after spending 5 days in intensive care at the Royal Alexandra Hospital, RAH, in Paisley, after collapsing with an aneurysm and going into cardiac arrest. He'd had undiagnosed polycystic kidney disease and had shown no symptoms. The 40-year-old then suffered more grief when her dad, 57-year-old Don Barilli, passed away in October the same year after battling bone marrow cancer and receiving treatment at the Inverclyde Royal Hospital, IRH. The mum of 2 from Greenock has now donated a huge sum of money to both the RAH and IRH to thank staff for the phenomenal care given to both Joe and Don before they died. A district nurse herself, Dawn donated £10,000 to the IRH renal unit, £5,000 to the RAH intensive care unit, and £5,000 to the Haematology Oncology Service at the IRH. On top of that, she has also donated £5,000 to Mind Mosaic, a charity in Inverclyde, which has been supporting her and her sons Rhys, 22, and Lennon, 18, since their dad passed away. A further £1,000 was donated to Ardgowan Hospice, and money was also provided to buy new football strips for new Scots who have arrived in Inverclyde. The money has all been raised by friends and family of Joe and Don. One of Joe's friends walked from Inverclyde to Parkhead in 24 hours, while others took part in a kilt walk. Other fundraising events, including a memorial fun day on the anniversary of Joe's death, have also taken place. Dawn, who had been with Joe for 23 years since she was 16, said, "All of the fundraising has kept me going. It's kept me sane. I chose the RAH and IRH because I wanted to thank the staff there for the phenomenal care given to both Joe and my dad. The one-to-one care Joe received in ICU was fantastic. He had the same nurse, Debbie Spencer, for 4 of the 5 days. She was only supposed to be working 3 of those, but I remember her staying on and doing an extra shift so she could be with him. They were so compassionate, and the way they supported us at such a difficult time was amazing." I decided to give to the renal unit in Inverclyde because obviously this was an issue with Joe's kidneys and the haematology-oncology ward where Dad was looked after. I wanted to keep all of the donations local, and I want each individual unit to benefit from it. I also want to say thank you to the paramedics and the district nursing team for the support they provided. Dawn revealed that her dad's cancer had been relatively stable until Joe passed away, but his health then declined suddenly, which she believes was down to the devastation he felt over the loss of his son-in-law. She said, "He couldn't cope seeing me unable to cope. His health just declined, and by the October his cancer had spread and he passed away." Joe had no symptoms whatsoever. He lived a normal, relatively healthy lifestyle. He woke up in the morning and was absolutely fine. He was brushing his teeth and collapsed in the bathroom. I performed CPR until my colleague, Gillian Stewart, who is a district charge nurse, arrived and took over, allowing me to stay on the phone with the ambulance service. When we got to the RAH and ICU, they discovered he had undiagnosed polycystic kidney disease. This had caused his blood pressure to rise and an aneurysm which ruptured that morning, and he went into a full cardiac arrest. It was horrendous. The trauma will live with me for the rest of my life. He was in a coma in the ICU for 5 days. He had a brain scan to see if there had been any healing, but it was worse than expected, and there was no recovery. Last week, Dawn visited the RAH to present a cheque to staff, including charge nurse Debbie Spencer, charge nurse Rachel Burns, consultant Professor Kevin Rooney, senior charge nurse John Hunter, registered nurse Kirsty Thompson, healthcare support worker Helen Fraser, and ICU housekeeper Senga McGee, who were all involved in caring for Joe in his final days. She also visited the IRH as well as Mind Mosaic to deliver her donations, and they will go into the IRH and RAH endowment funds. RAH ICU charge nurse Debbie Spencer, who has been working for the NHS for 28 years, said, "It's a privilege to have cared for Joe and to have got to know Dawn and her family, albeit in the saddest of circumstances. They are a really special family. We have been overwhelmed by Dawn's generosity, with her friends coming together to raise money for the unit, and we are so grateful. It's a real privilege to work in ICU and give our time and support to patients, some of whom may be at the end of their life, as well as their families and loved ones." Melanie McColgan, Director of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clydes sector, which includes both the RAH and IRH, said, Our staff work extremely hard to deliver the best care possible to patients and their families. We are grateful to Dawn and her friends and family for all of their fundraising efforts, particularly at such a difficult time for them. The proceeds going into the endowment funds for the RAH and IRH, and we thank them for this generosity. Dawn's words about our staff and the services we deliver are incredibly kind, and I know they are very much appreciated by all of our dedicated staff members. That article was written by Mark McDougall.
From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 11th of August, from the news section. Grouse shooting Scotland. Call for ban on all snares as season begins. Report by political correspondent Kathleen Nutt. Calls are being made to stop the mass killings of animals on shooting estates as the new grouse shooting season gets underway tomorrow on what is known as the Glorious 12. Under the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Act, passed earlier this year, sporting estates will be licensed for the first time in an attempt to halt the persecution of birds of prey, including hen harriers and golden eagles. MSPs voted for the controls amid intense pressure from conservation scientists and campaigners, after decades of illegal attacks on birds of prey by gamekeepers instructed to protect grouse on shooting estates. The legislation brought in a ban for the use of glue traps, designed primarily to catch rodents, but allows for the continued use of other traps, so long as practitioners complete an improved course to catch wild birds such as crows, as well as foxes, rabbits, weasels, moles and stoats. A report by the League Against Cruel Sports and Revive, a coalition of animal welfare, environmental and social justice organisations, last year found grouse shooting in Scotland is dependent on the killing of between 100,000 to 250,000 animals in traps and snares each year. They include species targeted as predators, such as foxes, weasels and stoats, but also non-target species including pine martens, hedgehogs, badgers, deer and hares. Campaigners want to see a full ban on traps being used for sport. We are not arguing that predator control should stop, but there needs to be a legitimate reason for doing it, and that there are high standards of animal welfare, said Mark Wisniewski, campaign manager for the Revive. But predator control is the purpose of increasing grouse numbers for sporting reasons is not a legitimate reason. One of our key goals in Revive is to end this killing to kill on grouse moors. He added, there is no reason to think the number of animals killed to increase grouse numbers for sports shooting will go down if the goal, to maintain a suitable surplus of grouse, continues as it is. Revive, which has spent the last 6 years campaigning on wildlife issues around the licensing of sporting estates, is now to broaden its work by examining the issue of land reform, with a conference to take place later this year. They estimate some 433 people own half of Scotland's land, with around 13% of the country's landmass set aside for grouse shooting. Revive recently called for backing for amendments to the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Bill to end generous public funding for shooting estates. Current agricultural subsidies see estates like Invermark, which is principally a sporting estate, in 2023 receive public money to the tune of £213,545. Mr. Wisniewski said, why do large shooting estates pay so little tax? Why don't local communities have more access to land? Why is so much of Scotland owned by so few people and for such a pointless reason as shooting birds for entertainment? Grouse moors exist in Scotland because it is the highest density of land ownership anywhere in the developed world. Landed gentry, hedge fund managers and mysterious offshore entities who own huge swathes of Scotland. Some have opted for rewilding, but the majority continue to manage the land to increase the number of grouse. To really tackle the travesty of grouse moors, we need more ambitious land reform. Revive plans to launch the Big Land Question at its annual conference in Perth this November, and to conduct a year-long programme of research, consultation and analysis to identify how the ownership and management of Scotland's land could be improved for the majority, not a minority. The coalition, which include the League Against Cruel Sports, Commonweal, Raptor Persecution UK, One Kind and Friends of the Earth Scotland, says it has already compiled evidence of the need for change. They say an analysis of a potential impact of a land reform found that the budget deficits for Scotland's most rural local authorities could be wiped out if the land was taxed in a similar way as homes. Meanwhile, independent polling by Diffley Partnership for Community Land Scotland and the Revive Coalition showed a majority of Scots want land reform policies to go much further than the land reform bill currently proposed by the Scottish Government. The research found that nearly 3/4 of respondents agreed that the Scottish Government should compel landowners to keep wealth and income in the local community and to meet climate and biodiversity targets, while a clear majority, 56%, agreed that a land tax should be implemented. Mr. Wisniewski added, "We understand that ordinary people and communities have strong feelings on topics like this, yet they lack the clout and influence of landowner organisations. We are determined to give voice to ordinary people's concerns on the topics of land ownership and land use. Scotland can't continue to be a playground for the benefit of a few people who want to shoot animals for sport, to manage it intensively, or to act against the interests of local people. It's time we had answers to the big land questions and an end to Scotland's concentrated land ownership." Ross Ewing, Moorland Director at Scottish Land and Estates, which represents landowners and estates, said, "Predator control is necessary for various land uses, including farming, crofting and grouse-moor management, all of which are completely legitimate and lawful, often bringing considerable social-economic benefits to rural communities. Revive, however, lays bare their true agenda when they campaign for predator control to be banned on grouse-moors only, displaying no interest in protecting vulnerable wildlife, such as ground-nesting birds, which thrive and manage moorland. It is widely recognised, including by the Scottish Government, that grouse moors contain some of the most important habitat and species that should be the focus of our conservation efforts. This was a view also shared by wildlife experts on the Government's independent grouse moor management review panel. Indeed, peer-reviewed science is demonstrating that vulnerable and threatened species, such as a Eurasian curlew, can produce 4 times as many chicks on grouse moors than on unmanaged moorland. This is no accident and testament to the diligent work of gamekeepers funded by landowners. In a GWCT study examining Muirkirk and North Lower Uplands, where keepering has declined sharply, an 84% drop in golden plover population, 88% drop in lapwing and 61% drop in curlew was recorded, a direct result of the lack of predator control. The Scottish Government recently announced the creation of a new Wildlife and Species Forum to examine many of these issues, and it is an initiative we are firmly behind. It is regrettable, however, that Revive seems to care little for many of these species about us striking a blow against those who own and work on grouse moors. A Scottish Government spokesperson said, "The Wildlife Management in Muirburn, Scotland Act 2024, is a significant step in our wider journey to ensure Scotland's environment is managed sustainably. We have struck the right balance between improving animal welfare, supporting rural businesses and reinforcing a zero-tolerance approach to raptor persecution and wildlife crime. The Act allows for the use of certain traps for legitimate predator control, but only under licence, which includes the requirement that the practitioner has undergone specific training to ensure trapping adheres to the high standards of animal welfare." And the article was by Kathleen Nutt. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 11th of August. From the news section, exclusive. Union demands investment to tackle COVID impact in schools. By James McKenna, education reporter. Scotland's biggest teaching union has said that post-COVID support for schools has been wholly insufficient, as it urges the Scottish Government and local authorities to increase investment. In an exclusive article for the Herald, EIS General Secretary Andrea Bradley says that, while schools were promised additional funding, staffing and resources to aid educational recovery, the sector has instead been subject to inadequate funding, reductions in staffing, and a scarcity of the resources needed to support all young people, including those from less affluent backgrounds and the growing number with additional support needs. Writing as part of her coverage of 2024 exam results, Ms. Bradley argues that despite the colossal commitment and effort of teachers, the impact of the COVID pandemic on young people's learning experience was profound, and the consequences continue to impact on young people today. She adds that young people from deprived backgrounds have been disproportionately affected, with serious consequences for educational equity and the drive to tackle the attainment gap which, as we saw this week, continues to persist and actually grew based on this year's SQA results. When exam results were released on Tuesday of last week, the Herald reported that pass rates had fallen and attainment gaps had increased in comparison to figures from the pre-pandemic era. Ms. Bradley draws particular attention to the effects of the loss of proper primary and secondary school transition for those young people who have recently completed S4, which, she argues, have a severe negative impact at an absolutely critical time for young people and their teachers. The impact of the switch to remote learning is also highlighted by the union, which says that its members highlighted at an early stage significant levels of non-engagement, particularly amongst children and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. This was, Ms. Bradley argues, in large part, this was due to digital poverty, where many households had limited or no connectivity and a lack of access to devices. This EIS also points out an alarming fall in school attendance levels in recent years, a trend which is more pronounced among children and young people from poorer economic backgrounds and those with additional support needs. Ms. Bradley explains that members report to increased numbers of people suffering from mental health problems for which they are unable to obtain adequate support. Ultimately, she argues that the Scottish education system requires significantly greater investment and a renewed commitment from the Scottish Government and local authorities to support schools in getting it right for every young person. Failure to achieve this, she adds, will result in the country paying a very high price for its underinvestment in public services. A spokesperson for the Scottish Government said they are already investing record levels in the education system, with the education and skills budget growing to over £4.8 billion for 2024-25, despite facing the most difficult financial circumstances since devolution. Any calls for additional investment must be seen in the context of the wider constraint on public finances. However, if a net increase in consequentials is forthcoming as the result of changes in school spending by the UK Government, we would seek to make that available to improve education outcomes in Scotland. Scottish Government officials are liaising with UK counterparts to seek clarity on the overall funding position. We are also offering local authorities £145.5 million this year to protect teacher numbers, supporting children and young people's education. Spending on additional support for learning reached a record high of £926 million in the latest available figures, 2022-23, to help address growing demand in this area. At least 280,000 devices have been distributed to young people across Scotland, according to the latest available figures. In the article was an exclusive by James McInerney from the Herald Scotland, Monday the 12th of August, from the Arts and Entertainment section. Edinburgh International Festival rivals Olympics on global stage. Report by Jodie Harrison. The Edinburgh International Festival rivals the Olympic Games on the global stage, its organiser has said, and Scotland's cultural extravaganza has the advantage of being held annually, unlike the Olympics' 4-year cycle. Writing in the Herald, Francesca Heggie, Chief Executive, Edinburgh International Festival, said that the parallels between the traditions and values of sports and culture festivals could not be denied. Ms Heggie, who worked on the organising committee for the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, writes that both were a beacon for peace among nations which showcased the best of humanity and the spirit of togetherness. She said, "As the world enjoys the marvel that is the Paris Games, the parallels between the traditions and values of sports and culture come to the fore. In the lead up to the 2012 Games, when I worked for the London organising committee for the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, the promise of once-in-a-generation celebration of excellence and internationalism, and the chance to meet people from all around the world in a summer of sport was intoxicating. Now, more than a decade later, I recognise that the Olympics and the International Festival are not just a showcase of physical or artistic excellence. Both represent a beacon for shared humanity and the pursuit of peace amongst nations. She added, "How lucky we are that, unlike London, Edinburgh has the chance to host the biggest creative event in the world every year. This year, more than 2,000 artists from 42 countries are appearing at the festival through a hand-picked programme of opera, theatre, music and dance. More than 1,000 Scottish artists are performing, including all 5 national performing companies." Ms Heggie said that the homegrown talent at the festival, which is now in its second week and runs until 25th of August, is the linchpin promoting the event to its international audience. She said, "Our festival is at its strongest when we host a diversity of views and traditions that inspire us to question and challenge our own perspectives. There is no better way to nurture this than through time spent in the communion that festivals offer. Through our shared rituals and collective experiences, we can, and must, work together towards a more empathetic world." As written by Jodie Harrison. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 12th of August, from the Arts and Entertainment section. Review: Cosse fan tutte, Edinburgh, Usher Halls. Review by Keith Bruce. Festival music, Cosse fan tutte, Usher Hall, Edinburgh. 4 stars. Last weekend they were in the pit at the Festival Theatre for Bizet's Cameron, and on Saturday the Scottish Chamber Orchestra provided the second of this Edinburgh Festival's Feast of Operas, with the second of their annual series of concert performances of Mozart's masterworks under the baton of principal conductor Maxim Emelianichev. With its compact cast of 6, a limited role for the SCO chorus, and a tune-packed score, Cosse fan tutte is ideally suited to the approach and the absence of an opera director overthinking its problematic cynical attitude to romantic and sexual fidelity for the modern age is arguably a further asset. That is not to say that the performance was not theatrical, with Emelianichev happily cast as an extra in much of the shenanigans, and adding flourishes of his own to the fortepiano continuo that Mozart did not write down, but might well have played. The principals, all singing from memory, gave us a fully realised exploration of the work. Costuming was, of course, limited. Tenor Josh Lovell and baritone Hugh Montague-Rendell donned capes to indicate their soldier's uniform and removed their dinner jackets and bow ties to be in disguise, while Hera Hyacinth Park, as Despina, had a succession of props to enable her mischief, which she enjoyed just a little too much. From the initial entry of the Christopher Maltman's Don Alfonso, the principals used the whole platform, sometimes singing from between choir and orchestra and unafraid to deliver the glorious ensembles scattered around the stage. Maltman was in utter command at the start, and his Machiavellian master of ceremonies was superb throughout, with the younger men vocally and physically well matched and full of action. Golda Schultz and Angela Brower gave us something more nuanced, hinting at the rivalry and competitiveness of Fiordiligi and Dorabella in the opening scene, and developing the most rounded characters. Vocally, the performances were delightful from start to finish, and the solo arias were all rewarded with audience applause, which didn't disturb the pacey storytelling too much. If the compromise of the denouement seemed to take a while to unfold, that is perhaps a flaw in the complete score we heard. But Emelianichev is such a meticulous, attentive musician that this was a Cosse where every note counted. And that was a review by Keith Bruce, 4 stars.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 13th of August 2024, from the Voices section. Oil traders buy North Sea assets as windfall tax hike looms. This article is by Mark Williamson. Oil traders have shown they believe there is lots of money to be made in the North Sea, even as industry leaders warn looming tax hikes will devastate the area. Chancellor Rachel Reeves last month confirmed plans for sweeping changes to the tax regime, which Labour included in its manifesto despite warnings from unions that the moves could take a heavy toll on jobs. The changes include a windfall tax hike that will take the total headline rate paid by oil and gas firms to 78%, while the term of the levy has been extended by a year to March 31st, 2030. The unjustifiably generous investment allowances introduced alongside the windfall tax by the former Conservative government in 2022 will be scrapped from November. The confirmation appeared to end industry leaders' hopes that economic realism would prevail and Labour would go easier on the industry than threatened if it won the election. Trade body OEUK appeared furious, accusing the government of confirming the tax plans in a late afternoon paper without warning. It said the announcement jeopardised jobs in communities across the UK. This is something the Prime Minister committed in his manifesto not to do, complained OEUK Chief Executive David Whitehouse. OEUK is seeking urgent engagement with the Treasury in the hope that it can secure concessions before the budget is published on October 30th. However, the day after the changes were announced, came news of a significant North Sea deal which suggested the prospect of higher taxes did not put some buyers off the area. Viaro Energy confirmed it had struck a deal to acquire what it described as one of the largest and longest gas-producing asset portfolios in the North Sea from Shell and US giant ExxonMobil. The terms were not disclosed, but the deal was reported to be worth $500 million, or £390 million. The portfolio includes 11 fields that are in production, along with exploration assets. Viaro seeks potential to recover more than 120 million barrels of oil equivalent from the portfolio, which it said could help meet UK demand for years. The company also highlighted the potential to use the acreage concerned to support the transition to a low-carbon energy system by developing wind farms and the like on it. Chief Executive Francesco Mazzagatti said the portfolio provided the backbone of the UK's energy production and security and represented one of the best strategically placed solutions that have the potential to play an important role in the energy transition. He said the major deal with Shell and ExxonMobil was a crowning achievement in the campaign to become a major North Sea player that Viaro has conducted amid years of upheaval in the industry. Mr. Mazzagatti decided to diversify into the oil and gas production in the North Sea after making a fortune in the global oil trading business. Viaro entered the North Sea through the £248 million acquisition of Rockrose Energy in 2020. Rockrose acquired North Sea assets from majors amid the downturn that started in the industry after oil prices plunged in 2014. Viaro acquired West of Shetland assets in March last year, 10 months after the windfall tax was introduced, and 4 after the rate of the levy was increased. In December, Viaro bought into the huge undeveloped Bressay field east of Shetland. Viaro negotiated the deal with Shell and ExxonMobil during a period in which the odds on Labour winning the general election shortened dramatically, and Keir Starmer made clear the party would increase the tax burden on the North Sea significantly. Mr. Matsagati may have decided the polls were wrong, or that Viaro could still generate good returns on its increased investment following the tax changes that were in prospect. The deal with Shell and ExxonMobil was concluded a month after another business backed by oil traders expanded in the North Sea. In late June, Prax announced that it had agreed to acquire the West of Shetland production portfolio developed by French giant Total Energies. This includes a stake in the giant Greater Lagan Area development. Chief Executive Sanjeev Kumar Susya Pillai described the acquisition as major and said it would support a long-term push for growth in the North Sea by Prax. The company entered the area in March last year through the £250 million acquisition of Hurricane Energy. The deals involving Prax and Viaro suggest that oil and gas industry players reckon there is still lots of money to be made in the North Sea, even if the headline tax rate has almost doubled from 40% before the windfall tax was introduced. It is significant that both deals involved relatively recent entrants to the North Sea, increasing their exposure to the area. As far as the majors are concerned, the latest deals continue a strategy under which they have sold what are regarded as mature North Sea assets. ExxonMobil is investing heavily in Guyana and in US shale assets. Viaro and Prax may have been able to strike the latest deals on better terms than would have been available before Labour raised the prospect of a fresh windfall tax hike. However, Shell has continued to invest in North Sea assets that it thinks have long-term potential. The company highlighted the redevelopment of the Penguins field in its second quarter results presentation this month. On Friday, North Sea heavyweight Harbour Energy underlined how profitable North Sea oil and gas production has been recently, even if prices have fallen from the highs reached after Russia launched its full-scale war on Ukraine. Harbour said it sold oil and gas for an average of $85 per barrel oil equivalent in the 6 months to June 30th. Production costs averaged just $18 per barrel. Harbour was a vocal critic of the introduction of the windfall tax, following which the company cut 350 jobs, the bulk of which were Aberdeen-based. Harbour developed out of the Chrysaor business that acquired big North Sea portfolios from Shell and ConocoPhillips amid the last downturn. Critics of Labour's move say that even if firms could afford to pay more tax on their profits, cuts in investment allowances will make it uneconomic for them to develop assets that could support energy security and jobs in the UK. While firms such as Harbour have generated huge profits in the North Sea in recent years, opponents of the windfall tax on producers suggest the traders that sit in the centre of global markets have been the biggest winners. That argument was strengthened by reports last month that commodities giant Vitol paid senior staff a record $6.4 billion last year after making $13 billion profit. The payout put 450 partners in line for an average $14 million. That article was by Mark Williamson. This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 13th of August 2024 from the Voices section. What does the spate of violent protests mean for employers? This article is by Musab Hemzi. Recent days have seen widespread protests, riots and violence spreading across the UK, some of which has been racially or religiously aggravated. But what should an employer do if an employee is involved, either through direct participation or stirring up trouble on social media? Anyone allegedly involved in participating in or inciting a riot may be arrested and charged with criminal offences. An employer's first instinct might be to dismiss the individual, but this would be unwise, because they may later be able to establish their innocence or charges dropped. However, based on how the justice system has dealt with those involved in previous riots, those charged will be unlikely to obtain bail, probably be remanded in custody, and receive custodial sentences if convicted, even for a first offence. If an employee can't work because they are in custody, the employer must consider whether their job can be kept open. It may be argued that the employment contract has been frustrated because the employee's imprisonment makes performance of their contract impossible. Alternatively, employers may be able to dismiss someone fairly for misconduct or another substantial reason. They need to consider all the facts and decide whether the employee's conduct is serious enough to be treated as a formal disciplinary matter. I'd recommend taking specific legal advice before proceeding. In any case, an employee who is unable to work because they are in prison does not need to be paid. In my view, someone cannot rely on the unlawful deduction from wages legislation if they aren't paid during the time spent in prison. If an employee hasn't been arrested, but the employer has evidence to suggest they were involved in riots or violence, they can still take disciplinary action. Similarly, an employer does not need to postpone disciplinary measures because the outcome of a prosecution is not yet known. If they have reasonable evidence to suggest that an employee has broken workplace rules or policies, or has engaged in conduct which risks bringing the employer into disrepute, a disciplinary procedure can be triggered. Employers must follow a fair disciplinary procedure, giving the individual an opportunity to explain their conduct and any mitigating circumstances. I recommend checking your disciplinary policy to see what this says about criminal investigations. Some of your workforce, especially black, ethnic minority or migrant staff, or religious groups, may be feeling particularly vulnerable right now. It's worth reminding all staff, therefore, of their duty to comply with your code of conduct, the consequences of making inappropriate comments on social media, your zero-tolerance approach to discrimination or harassment, and the need to treat colleagues with dignity and respect. It is also prudent to let colleagues know how to report any incidents of discrimination or harassment they may experience. If staff working in towns and cities marred by these riots and violence request temporary adjustments, like working from home for a few weeks or adjusting working hours to avoid travelling alone at night because they feel unsafe, these should be given reasonable consideration at this particularly difficult time. Musab Hemzi is a partner and credited by the Law Society of Scotland as a specialist in discrimination law and employment law.
The Herald on the 13th of August and the news section. Brewer hails lager beer as best in Scotland by Ian McConnell. The chief executive of Innocent Gun has declared its lager beer as the best in Scotland after it picked up gold in the country and taste categories in the World Beer Awards. Edinburgh founded Innis & Gunn declared it was the only Scots beer producer to scoop gold in the whole competition. Dougal Gunn Sharp founded Innis & Gunn in 2003 after he thought of brewing beer in whisky casks. Innis & Gunn said his plan to bring original beer and original ideas to the world took off as he created a super premium beer with a deep, smooth and moorish flavour. He launched Innis & Gunn Lager in 2013 after pubs in Scotland asked him to brew a premium Scottish lager. Mr. Sharp said, "This is a very proud moment for our team, but this recognition only confirms what we've already known. Our lager is the best in Scotland, and it can compete with any in the world." Innis & Gunn declared that its lager, hailed for its zesty hops and naked golden oats, was one of just a small selection of classic pilsners from around the world to receive the top award. It added, as well as being top Scot, Innis & Gunn beat big names from around the world, including Estrella Damm, Madry, Stella, Beck's, Chang, and Heverlee, who all won silver. Touted as crisp, zesty and refreshing, the lager beer is enjoyed by punters across the UK, mainland Europe and North America, being sold in hundreds of pubs and more than 1,000 supermarkets. Innis & Gunn, meanwhile, noted its original beer won silver in the taste category. Mr. Sharp said, "Everyone who tries our beer is a convert, and more people are trying our beer every day. So the potential is huge. I hope the drinkers feel a sense of pride that something homegrown in Scotland can win against the most well-known premium lagers in the world." And that was by Ian McConnell. The Herald on the 13th of August and the news section. Changes made to gender identity services in Greater Glasgow and Clyde by Mark McDougall. Patients will no longer be able to self-refer to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's gender identity services after new arrangements were put in place. The health boards say they will only accept referrals to its gender services from a clinician to ensure patients with gender incongruence are supported and placed appropriately on its waiting lists. It means they will need to be referred by either their GP, CAMHS, or adult mental health service clinician, and will be given support while they wait on their first appointment for the gender service. The changes will affect referrals to the Young People's Gender Service, which is provided nationally, as well as the Adult Gender Service for the West of Scotland. The new arrangements are in line with other clinical specialities, but it won't have an impact on anyone already on the waiting list for either the Young People's Gender Service nationally or the Adult Gender Service in the West of Scotland. Dr. Amelia Craigton, NHS GGC Director of Public Health, said, "Ensuring that our patients have the appropriate support and care they need is a priority for us, and updating this referral process enables us to do that. Gender patients will now be referred to by a GP, CAMHS, or Adult Mental Health Service clinician. In doing so, they are also advised of self-care and signposted to the appropriate support while they wait for their first gender service appointment. When it's time for their first appointment with a gender service, we have an accurate background for them and can immediately plan the most appropriate path of care." That was by Mark McDougall. The Herald on the 13th of August and the news section. Elon Musk and Hamza Yousaf at war and how we should respond by Neil Mackay. Like the far right, which he clearly admires, Elon Musk has overplayed his hand. It's not just advertisers deserting Twitter or refuse to call it by its rebrand X. Ordinary users are leaving in droves too, disgusted at what he's done to the social media platform. I've been a fairly prolific Twitter user for about 10 years, so I'm aware what it was like pre-Musk. It was a bear pit and could get very nasty at times. But there were standards. If you incited violence or used the most disgraceful racial or sexual insults, you were banned. It reminded me of an edgy nightclub. Hands could get thrown, but there was always bouncers to step in, and management enforced strict house rules. Musk took an edgy nightclub and turned it into a Nazi toilet. You can call black people the N-word. You can call transgender folk groomers. The site is flooded with anti-Semitism, misogyny and homophobia. Twitter is the biggest disinformation event in history. Musk himself repeatedly peddles lies. Before he bought Twitter, he used to call a British caver who he helped rescue traumatized schoolboys a pedo. Within days of purchase, he pushed the most noxious conspiracy theory about the hammer attack on the husband of former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. I won't repeat the lies Musk amplified. It's beneath contempt. Since then, Musk has completely unravelled. We're watching a billionaire radicalised by his own product in real time. It's a Frankenstein story for the 21st century. Evidently, he's not the only rich fool swallowed whole by Twitter, and there's plenty of poor and middle-income fools too. I know once reputable journalists who went down the Twitter rabbit hole and never returned. Race, COVID, gender, Islamophobia, the manosphere. Once these characters get a hit from one drug, they're soon imbibing the lot. Eventually they're fully radicalised and sense, perhaps even sanity, is left behind. I've warned about Musk for years. Long ago I said I considered him a threat to democracy. Hamza Yousaf, who might sue Musk, has just called him one of the most dangerous men on the planet. Musk has carried out a campaign of deliberate race baiting, claiming Yousaf loathes white people. It's been appalling to watch. I've met Yousaf. Politically, I've often disagreed with him and called out his failings in print. But he's a good, decent man and he's not a racist. To say so is clearly defamatory, and Yousaf should sue this vile, entitled upstart, not for money, but simply to put Musk in his place and make an example of him before the world. However, if I wanted to write about how disgusting Musk is, how much he deserves his comeuppance, I'd have to ask the editor to assign me to the entirety of today's paper. There's not scope to account for his foulness and sins in 1,000 words. The question I want to pose, though, is this: how do we ordinary citizens respond to Musk? Users are leaving Twitter en masse. Should we follow? Should we stay or should we go? Musk talked up civil war in Britain. Shouldn't we punish him like those advertisers? I know journalists, academics, writers, artists and filmmakers who've all left Twitter this last week. I thoroughly respect their decisions. They won't support hate, and that's commendable. However, I'm not going anywhere. I should first say that, like many folk, I've flounced off Twitter before, mid-hissy fit. Who hasn't? I have a relatively high number of followers, about 30,000. This means if you do or say something daft, you get public pelters from sometimes hundreds of people. Fair dues. I own that. But it can be embarrassing, and most folk, when embarrassed, duck for cover. So I'm not claiming to be some Boy Scout. I have an ego like most folk, and I don't like it bruised. I've also, though, had to lock my account sometimes. The far-right Scottish Unionists, Scottish Nationalists, the Anti-Trans Brigade, Trump's MAGA head cases, and the British hard left have all launched campaigns against me on Twitter at one time or another, enraged at something I've said in print. Mostly it's water off a duck's back. I'm a big boy, but sometimes when there's literally thousands of hate messages pouring in per hour, often orchestrated, the best option is to lock the front door to keep the zombies at bay. However, it's hard for anyone who lives in public sphere to quit Twitter. Politicians need it to communicate with voters. Journalists need it to communicate with their audience. Journalism is part of the attention economy. I need to tell the public I've written something, so they'll come to the Herald website and read it. If I don't speak to the public on Twitter, then I drastically reduce the number of possible readers. So, leaving Twitter would be damaging professionally. Some say the UK government should suspend its Twitter account, given Musk amplified far-right talking points related to rioting. But that's self-silencing, no? To me, the simple truth is, I've faced thugs, from sectarian boot boys to real Nazis, in the street and never run. Sometimes they ended up in hospital, other times the thugs backed down or were defeated. There's power in numbers. So I'm not going anywhere. If Twitter is indeed the global town square, then nobody should let the far right bully them out. I'll remain on Twitter. I suggest other people do too. As long as I'm there, I'll do my small part calling Musk to account. I'll use this algorithm against him, amplifying posts which take him to task or shame him. Indeed, I hope to watch Musk's Twitter ruined. I want to see the building he set alight burned to the ground. When it's a smoking ruin, Musk will be gone. He's a type of coward who can't own his own mistakes, after all. But if good people remain, then we can rebuild Twitter after his implosion and bring it back, not to what it once was, but to what we want it to be, a real global square where, yes, folk can get angry and say stupid, even mean things, but more importantly, a place that's safe for everyone on Earth, regardless of their colour, faith or gender. And that was by Neil Mackay. The Herald on the 13th of August, and the news section, a £13.4 billion electricity superhighway between Scotland and England approved by Mark McDougall. The £13.4 billion electricity superhighway between Scotland and England has been approved by energy regulator Ofgem in the biggest single investment for electricity transmission infrastructure in Britain. The 500-kilometre, 311-mile Eastern Green Link 2 (EGL2) project will stretch from Aberdeenshire to North Yorkshire and will transport vast amounts of renewable energy between Scotland and England. The joint venture between Scottish and Southern electricity networks and National Grid is part of a push to modernise the electricity grid to deal with greater demands placed on it by the green transition. The new network capacity from the power line will carry enough renewable electricity to power 2 million homes, Ofgem said, describing it as a superhighway. Chief Executive Jonathan Brearley said Ofgem is fully committed to supporting the government to meet its aims of getting clean power by 2030. Today's announcement is a further step in putting the regulatory systems and processes in place to speed up network regulation to achieve its aim. The massive new interconnected cable will be able to move 2 gigawatts of electricity between Scotland and England, partly enabling the NATA to benefit from offshore wind energy generated by offshore wind farms in the North Sea. Ofgem said it's pushing to fast-track the approvals process for power projects to help the UK meet its 2030 net zero carbon emissions target. The announcement also comes after Labour said it would ease planning regulations as part of a bid to get more homes and power infrastructure related schemes built in the coming years. Most of the 500-kilometre, 311-mile cable will be laid under the North Sea, while the rest will be underground onshore, Ofgem said. Construction is planned to start later this year, with a new connection due to be operational by 2029. The regulator also provisionally gave the green light to a £295 million funding package for a set of upgrades to the electricity grid in Yorkshire. The project, which is run by National Grid, will involve building new substations and overhead lines to improve networks in the north east of England. That's by Mark McDougall.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and tell your friends about our service.